Hey, Morris.
Let's start with shepherded items, I guess.
Okay.
Um,
Class development.
you want to?
I think your mic isn't working, Morris.
How about now?
Oh, it is. Yes.
There you go.
Yeah, I was muted by accident. Yeah, so there's no major developments. There was a bit of discussion about promotion in array initializers, and I was a bit too optimistic about whether we could make like vecnew work, which I think is not going to happen. But yeah, Ollie is gone this week, so there's not been a lot else that concerns the Lang team, but I'm sort of slowly working toward if and match and constants.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
I think the plan was that when master branches to beta, that we remove the old checker.
That was Eddie B's suggestion, and I agree with that.
That seems sensible. Yes. Yeah. Does with respect to array initializers and vecnew, that's only a problem. Isn't that only a problem if we like require promotion? If we allow runtime expression instead of doing a value-based analysis, then we shouldn't have that problem, should we?
Could you say that again?
So the other idea was that we would allow runtime expressions as well, not just promotable ones.
Correct.
Presumably we wouldn't have any problem in that case. We just need to be forward compatible with that.
Right. And that does change the semantics, the current semantics of array initialization, because currently, since we require copy, if you, let's say, use an impure function to initialize an array, it will call that impure function once, whereas presumably at runtime, we would call it n times for each item in the array, which does change.
Sorry, for those of us who don't have this entirely in cache, can we just make a quick example?
Yeah, sorry.
This is like something like this, vecnew 22 or something.
Yeah. So, well, this is specifically, all right, we're there. Yeah. So if you have something like this, currently this has one meaning, which is it will call rand once. We would like to make vecnew work or boxnew work, but then the only real way to make those work is to call boxnew n times, whereas currently we only call rand once. So there is a bit of a change in semantics there.
Rand can never be const, but boxnew can.
I was going to ask, yeah, it seems perfectly reasonable to call a const function with the same inputs once rather than n times.
Right. Yeah, so we would, basically the rule would be const functions are called n times because they can't have side effects, and everything else is called once and copied and requires copy. So that works. We are a ways out. We still need to figure out the rules around TEEP allocation in const for this is an issue at all. But yeah, that works.
And on that front, I think me and Ollie should write an RC at some point, or maybe more people.
Just to confirm something, because I've never considered writing this syntax in dynamic code either, is the defined runtime semantic that we invoke the expression and evaluate it once per element?
I think that, I think there's a design choice there. I think probably this needs more like async discussion, possibly with some RFC again or something.
I feel like it seems pretty related to promotion, and I feel like Ralph has been pushing hard for, yeah, I don't know. I'd like to hear Ralph's point of view on this. But.
If we could have const clone, are we calling it multiple times because we want to call it multiple times, or because we don't have const clone? Because the vec macro version of this uses clone.
I can't say authoritatively. I would
yeah,
lean
it makes me
towards
ponder if we'd want to clone it instead of calling it multiple times, because that would avoid the behavior difference you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, I just tested, and apparently at runtime we do only call it once.
Yeah, definitely right now.
Okay. So we.
Yeah, I forgot.
Is there a link to where this is taking place, so if people want to continue saying they can?
Let me put it in there.
I think there's some useful discussion in the first RFC as well that's relevant here.
Okay.
I think some comments by Eddie B and yours and Nico, especially.
I always come across comments. I'm like, I wrote that. Okay. I guess I understood this once upon a time, or maybe not. That's the case. Maybe. Okay. Oh, I see. Yeah, we should set up an official group, but we can chat about that when Ollie's back. So, right. FFI unwinding. Kyle, do you want to talk? Are you here? You're here. Or do you want me to?
I am here. I would say at a high level, this week, I guess, week and a half, 2 weeks, has kind of had a lot of, Central characterized it as back and forth, and that's not inaccurate. Yeah, so probably the most important output is that HackMD document that's linked there. We've reopened the idea of just letting C unwind. Sorry, letting extern C without an unwind. I didn't say that very well. But yeah, there's quite a few points of contention still, I would say, in terms of what path forward we want. We thought it was pretty close to having a PR ready, an RFC, and I would say that we are not as close as we thought to having an agreement, a consensus on what the direction forward is, technically.
Yeah, I would say the argument has proven. We discussed this last week in the meeting, and when I left that, I was feeling pretty convinced we knew the answer, that we should make C not make it UB to unwind through C calls and introduce C unwind. After hearing more of the arguments, I'm less sure. One thing I think I want to take a little bit to, like I said, reorganize that document and try to think it through, and what are the cases and what are the appealing choices and what are the cases for and against them. But one thing I'm wondering is whether I feel like this is a place where there are definitely strong opinions amongst the team, and maybe what we should do, I don't think today is the right day, but is try to have that, present those cases and have that conversation, schedule a time to have it, a more extended time than squeezing it into a meeting. I know, Taylor, you had a lot of pretty strong opinions on this point. And I'm wondering if there's specific things, both I'm wondering if you'd like to be in that, but secondly, if there's, I was wondering I thought a lot of that had to do with the amount of dead code we can optimize out and other sort of performance considerations around the choice. And I was wondering if we can maybe make measurements on that in the fuchsia code base. Do you think that makes sense? Like, what is the simplest one would be, what is the difference between panic equals abort and panic equals unwind for some metrics? But maybe you're having issues with your connectivity.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yay! Okay, cool. Sorry, I was talking before, but I guess you couldn't hear me.
Could you hear us?
I could hear you. Yeah, I'd be happy to meet and have a more dedicated conversation on that. I'd also be happy to do some measurements and work with other people to do measurements on the fuchsia code base here. We've done some existing measurements around panic equals abort versus not panic equals abort, and some we have a bunch of stuff for doing size profiling and stuff in tree, so I'd be happy to help with that.
Cool, that's awesome.
Yeah,
Let's talk about it offline then.
Very appreciated.
So is size, but I'm correct that like size profiling is the main concern for you there?
Yes.
Okay.
I have other concerns beyond that, but
I'm having some
I think
like audio artifacts. I don't know. I heard robotic sounds. Don't know what was just said. But
so I have concerns beyond the size stuff. But I think
yeah, I'm not suggesting that's all the possible concerns. Just that.
No, I know. I've already noted those, I think. So.
Yeah, I would definitely say visit the document and see if you feel that there are things that are not like you have concerns that are not reflected there, just add them in, or if they're only partially reflected, go ahead and edit. That's what it's for.
Oh, there is that.
It's right here.
Document. Right. Thank you. Shall we move on?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about din trait.
I guess the only other thing to mention is just that in case anyone didn't know, the RFC to actually announce the group was refactored out as its own thing and opened and is an FCP. Probably you all get notifications of that anyway.
It's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I think we're currently in FCP, but
Yes.
that might be something we want to do, like static Morse for the const evaluation thing.
I was thinking that would just be like mainly a compiler to group.
That seems like it has tons of linking interaction, right?
Sure, yeah, but the main work right now is compilers and stuff. That might change in the future.
I just want to get in the habit of making our decisions more documented, but we'll talk about it later. So din trait stuff. There's a couple things under this heading, but the main one that I've been using it for is this bug around coherence and soundness, which you all may remember from meetings past. And the problem fundamentally is that when you have a trait, we sort of introduce a fake impl or synthetic impl, let's say, it's not fake, for the din trait version of that trait, right, for that type. And that impl is not fully integrated into coherence, which means that you can write, let me find a good simple example. You can write things that overlap it. In particular, well, I don't have a great example, but if you have like an impl for all t, where t is not necessarily sized, here we go. And it turns out, so last time we talked about this, we proposed a solution of why don't we look and see if there's any potentially overlapping impl, and then we'll remove it. If there is, we will not introduce the synthetic one. And in that way, there's no overlap now. There's just one, like basically, the problem was there are two impls, the one the compiler introduced and the one the user wrote. We're going to take the one the compiler introduced away, so there's only one, and now we don't have a problem. Well, that's true, but it turns out that there is plenty of code that unfortunately relies on the existence of both of those, so to speak, and in particular, the any trait does. So there's this impl here, which says for any type T, which is not necessarily sized, we can implement any for T. And what type ID does is it calls some type ID thing. And so this basically implements any for din traits. It also technically implements any for din any. And so this is exactly the overlap we're talking about. But what the compiler currently does is, just due to essentially accidental specialization is what it kind of does. So if, when we're actually generating code, if we see that the receiver type is din any, we generate a call through the vtable, and thus the type ID you get back is not for the type din any, but for the underlying hidden type of the object itself, which is what you actually wanted. So unfortunately, this impl exists, it's stable, and what I somewhat amusingly, when I did implement my PR, I basically changed the behavior of the any trait, because now we took away the vtable call, and so you just always called this, which meant that no matter what the din any was, no matter what type was hidden inside the din any, you always got back the same type ID, which was for the din any type itself, which was not the one you wanted. So the compiler crashed in horrible ways that took me a while to understand. It seems pretty clear we cannot do that change just like that, because it completely breaks the any type. So what I realized, though, is that in fact, there is a way to view this that is fine, which is that we could think of, do I have a write-up of it? I don't know. We could, not a very good one, apparently. We could think of this compiler-introduced impl. We can basically allow both impls to exist as long as one is a specialization of the other. And in particular, the one that the compiler introduces is a specialization in this case, right? It's a more narrow, it's implementing any, not for any type T, but for din any specifically. So that if we just did that, if we just made the compiler understand that this impl exists and do the normal coherence check, we would still get a compilation error here, because this would have to be declared default to acknowledge that there would be another impl that might specialize it. So it's still like a backwards incompatible change to do, but it would be sound, and it would permit the any trait, and it would also permit the other uses in the standard library, which I found, which was like borrow, mute, and toString. And I did find some people in the wild using these as trait objects, so they do exist. So the only thing is, there's something weird to me about the solution. First of all, let me stop. Does that make sense to everyone so far?
So the tick static thingy, if we are specializing on that one, doesn't that risk breaking lifetime parameters?
That's not a specialization on tick static. That's just a constraint on T.
Yeah, but it works because of this bound central, but that's a good point. So Central is pointing out that tick static, this is not actually for any T, it's only for tick static ones. And din any, if din any were not guaranteed to be tick static, that wouldn't be a strict specialization.
Okay, yeah.
But din any happens to be actually guaranteed to be tick static.
One brief question regarding specialization, just so that I understand where we are there. Is the concern with specialization that we all absolutely do want to have it, and we're just not 100% certain that we can soundly implement it? Or is the concern also that we don't have general consensus that we want it, even if we can do it? I'm just trying to figure out if this is a technical limitation or also a consensus limitation.
I think it's a technical limitations modulo some design choices. Like,
okay.
There are some
That's all I was
flavors.
trying to find out is if it's something where we all have a general consensus and it's just a matter of we don't yet want to depend on it because we're not 100% certain it's possible, then I'm less concerned about uses of it that are hidden away in the compiler or similar.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Can be.
So I'm kind of ignoring the issue of stabilizing specialization. That is an important issue, though. I just like saying, let's pretend we had a stable specialization that we. But it's good to point out that to separate those two things. Definitely.
So the one point I would make regarding relying on specialization is that it would be good to not like be careful with not relying more on it in the standard library. So if we can have some sort of flag or attribute that controls the thing, that might be useful.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. I think there's some question of timing and how we would do it, but that right now this strikes me as the most viable way forward. But there's still a concern I haven't gotten to yet already, which is separate from that, which is if we here's my tab. If we do this approach I'm talking about, then basically the question then becomes, when does the compiler introduce this new impl of trait for din trait? Because now, it used to be we sort of just did it opportunistically when we thought we could, whenever the trait was object safe, or din I prefer to say din compatible, but yeah, when it was usable with din. However, that is a little weird now, because now you start to get errors, like you have some trait that you wrote and you don't intend for it to be din compatible, and you write an impl like this one, and now you're getting errors because you didn't write default, because the compiler is putting in a specializing impl for you that maybe you don't actually want. So that seems unfortunate to me. And that's what led me to ponder an alternative, which is maybe what we do is we say that, so for a long time, I sort of regretted that we implicitly opt traits into being din compatible anyway. And I wish that it was an explicit step where you declared the trait to be din compatible. There are both pros and cons to this. It would obviously be a huge breaking change to do it. However, if it does seem like, okay, you could say something like, it's implicitly din compatible if it can be so in a harmless way. So if there's no overlapping impulse. Otherwise, it is not din compatible unless you explicitly opt it back in with a din trait. And then you get this impl, in which case you have to meet the specialization requirements. So like what that would mean in practice is if we just did this change, the any trait would not be considered din compatible. That would obviously break a lot of code, so we'd have to declare it as din. And then we would have to declare this as default. And then what you could do, I realized, is, or I was suggesting, if we do have an addition, you could plausibly say, well, we're moving to this din trait model. In Rust 2021, all things that are din have to be declared din, and we'll port your code forward as automatically as we can. We can't do it 100% perfectly. But for backwards compatibility, we use this more complicated mechanism in earlier editions.
But we still resolved the soundness issue in earlier editions.
Yeah, both editions would be sound. They're just
Right.
It's just a question of like how complex. The model for 2021 would just be more simple. It would be like, if you write din on the trait, you can use it as a din trait, and there are rules that are enforced.
Right.
I'd really like to do the din on the trait to use it as din, because I think a lot of people accidentally make promises about traits being din compatible.
That's exactly. Yeah, it'd be good to enumerate the reasons, but that is a big one for me. Like, just look at the examples we have here, like the borrow trait. Did we really intend for din borrow? I don't think so. But it's out there. It's not necessarily bad that it's out there, but like now we have to deal with that.
So this seems attractive. I have one idea around the addition. What if we introduced like a nightly Rust 2018 plus, and then we have ideas that we want to throw inside an edition at some point, we like do it now, and when we feel ready, when we feel like we have collected enough things in that flag, we can like have an RC to actually have an edition, so that we are sort of not rushing to things.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think we should shelve that, but I like that idea.
Yeah.
Just to confirm, you're proposing that only work on nightly and would not propagate to beta or stable? If so, that sounds like a really good idea to me too.
Yeah, but it's more like a compiler development thing than anything we would. It's a very experimental feature, basically.
Okay, seems reasonable.
I think it was even foreseen in the original. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter.
Nico.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the rules you're proposing for the current edition, those are completely backwards compatible?
No, because they will break code because they're sound.
Yeah, so they break code. But do we have a sense that there are people, because like, are there people who are accidentally, like, because you have overlapping inputs that are not unsound as long as you aren't using them to,
Right. One of the unknowns that I have to evaluate is what will be the impact on existing users. So I can prepare a PR that does just the breaking part.
Mhm.
It'll be very hard, and we can see. I think I can do this. Yeah. What I'll probably do is add the din trait feature, but it just doesn't really do anything but opt out from this rule, so that I can get any and borrow and stuff compiling, and then we can test the impact on the ecosystem. Because I think though it should be compatible with most uses. Basically, the case that breaks is you have an overlapping impl and you use the trait as a din trait. So
Yeah.
my hypothesis is a lot of people who have overlap, a lot of traits are not din traits to begin with, so they're ruled out. And of those that are, some, only some subset have impls for all t, and so those are the ones that actually get affected.
I mean, it just seems like I don't understand, like the din trait thing. I mean, I think it's a good idea, but it seems like not really connected to this soundness issue, because we're gonna have to do the thing without it, the backwards compatible.
No, but you still need it. Even in 2018, you need it. It would still be there in 2018 because you need some way to opt back in to the specialization-based version for any.
Why? I think I'm missing why you need to opt into that.
So if you have, okay, so the answer is that if you have, you would get, basically, if you have a potentially overlapping impl, meaning any impl that is implemented for a t that is not sized, then your trait would not be din compatible unless you opt back in. And when you opt back in, we would use the full coherence rules, including
Why
the
can't we just
specialization.
apply those coherent rules to that impl?
I don't think, I have to look. So I'm not sure if we can, what we would need to be able to do is to say, while we're trying to solve, we have to figure out if this thing is din compatible.
I see. Because there's two choices, I think, right? You can either reapply those rules or your trait is just not din compatible.
Right.
And so we don't want to break people who actually just want like a non-object safe trait.
Yeah, exactly.
I see.
People who never cared if their thing was object safe or not shouldn't have to meet the extra requirements.
I think I'd like to know how many people would be, what will be broken if we applied this rule across the board.
Yeah, that was my intended next step. And I think there might be a version of this we could do where we say, if the extended rules, it's din incompatible if the extended rules, you don't get a hard error, it just becomes din incompatible if you don't have the right default. But I can explore that also. I should write that down. However, I'm a little bit wary. I would sort of like to get away from that because basically it's just getting increasingly Baroque.
Yeah, definitely.
and we keep almost hitting unresolvable cycles of logic by trying to figure out, by not having this declaration to know whether we should enforce the rule. It's getting more and more complicated. So I'd sort of like to stop it.
It's the object safe rules are already, really Baroque people. And so just adding new rules, not great.
Time check. We are at 30 minutes.
I was going to say 30 minutes for the shepherding is good. So let's move on.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
Let me just take a note here, though, then say the next step. I'll just take some notes. Keep going.
So QMX is not here, I think.
Yeah.
So the never type stuff, I changed. I moved the fallback to a new feature gate and stuff. So it's waiting on reviews at the moment, both in XFP terms and in actual PR terms. So please review.
Great, and you and I Central should sync up on the fallback lint at some point.
Yeah. I made a to-do tracking issue for it, so you can sync there or somewhere else.
Looks good.
So this we talked about.
I guess I can leave it nominated until it's actually in FTP.
So jumping down to nominated PRs. So there's this PR to allow foreign exceptions to unwind through Rust code and Rust panics to unwind through FFI that was tagged under the FFI unwind working group. It doesn't affect any documentation. It basically just affects, currently stuff happens when unwinding occurs, and this makes that stuff better. It seems like an important implementation step, whatever we do, if we ever want to have well-behaved unwinding. The highlights are here. I had planned to land this PR, but I guess I'm giving an opportunity for people to object here. I will add that I'm not sure, in particular around like catch unwind, for example. I don't know that that's the semantics we want long term. I just know it's closer to them. Go on.
Is the unwind allowed attribute is unstable?
It is unstable presently.
Yeah, because that seemed like it would conflict with the.
That's a good point. That this PR does not actually make unwinding. I sort of wasn't very precise. If you call an extra C function, I don't actually think it's affected by this PR very much at all. It's only if you call an unwind allowed function.
Yeah.
Which is kind of important.
But, and someday it seems like that'll be probably supplanted by external C unwind, right? That's my understanding.
Yes, depending
Seems
on.
like up in the air.
There's some active discussion on that, but yeah, potentially.
Yeah, but yeah, so we have some sort of this attribute probably won't be stabilized. That's what it seems like.
Some equivalent thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Whatever means one uses.
I mean, it seems good just to get this implemented so that whenever we decide how the syntax will be better.
Yeah, exactly. I had actually forgotten this point as I was talking, and I think that's my main concern was that there might be an objection that making the behavior sensible makes it more likely that people rely on it, which is plausibly true. But since it's already nightly only, it seems pretty harmless.
Yeah, they're opting into a. Yeah.
Okay.
So, okay. Next one, for integrate derived helpers was just entered FCP. I still need to review it, but that's on me. Moving on. To the nominated issues, attribute macro helper attributes. So this is a proposal to, so right now we have helper attributes for derived macros, which make it easier to implement derived macros. Meanwhile, if you use proper macro attributes, you have to remove the helpers yourself, which can be a bit of a pain sometimes. And this is basically a feature request to have helpers for proper macro attributes as well, not just for proper macro derived. And what Petroshenko is saying is that this seems easy to support as a convenience feature. And I think in the pre-triage, our consensus was that we are generally positively inclined to this, but a short RFC with a description of the semantics would be useful. Does anyone disagree with that? Or are there questions?
I guess the only question would be, do we really want an RFC, or will we be satisfied with a straight to unstable?
The alternative to an RFC would be like a PR that has a lot of docs and is like, explains the semantics in a good way.
I feel okay without an RFC for this.
Yeah, me too. But an RFC also is fine.
Right. Okay. So let's move on, because I want to try to
So-
release time for this turbofish.
What was the conclusion? That we still want an RFC or not?
I think
was
even
thinking-
documentation, something even from the stabilization report, it's something, we're not talking about something that's stabilized immediately, but something at that level of detail doesn't have to be an RFC, but
Sounded like our conclusion was, yeah, like I said here, small RFC will be fine, but a PR that links to a good write-up would probably suffice.
Yes.
Okay.
That's a good.
I don't want to go into the details on this because I fear it will take the whole meeting. But this is this wacky. Let's come back to another meeting. You can read my comment here. So I want to get to turbofish.
Maybe we should schedule a fuller meeting for it.
Yeah, I think so. Let's put it on. Can you make a list at the top somewhere? So there's that plus the FFI unwind. Put them as action items, I guess. So actually, shall we just jump to turbofish? Because this one I think is blocked on central reading things, if I recall.
Function pointers, something.
So
I think I've got a concern on there as well, I think.
are you referring to the generic parameters, Scott?
Oh, sorry.
I'm saying this one, I don't think there's much to say right now. And I know Boats wanted it. Boats had brought up turbofish specifically for discussing today.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to talk about how to unlock the thread.
Yeah.
Because I locked it for a few days, almost 11 months ago.
Everything you just said got lost, to me at least, in a robotic haze.
It came through for me.
Okay.
Just I want to know. I want us to unlock the thread, and not me to unlock the thread.
okay, that was the important thing there, right? Because the implication is that it's not just that you don't think you have the authority to unlock the thread; it's that you do not want to be the one to unlock it, right?
I want us to say something. Yeah, like Lang team talked about this, and this is what we're doing now.
Right.
To hopefully prevent a recursion of the previous situation on the thread.
Yeah. Well, getting some small things out of the way first. For the record, the concern that I have marked is one that just trivially needs a line or two added to the RFC, at which point I will happily lift it. So this is purely a documentation issue and not something that should be a significant blocker.
Yeah, I think Varkor would be happy to fix that.
I can't even find the frickin' comment.
GitHub, asinine behavior.
Yeah, let's see if this will work. Okay, so this was the other concern, which is probably if there is one concern for the thread, it's this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
From the language team's perspective, but I think there are more concerns.
I sort of put that one in as I'm not sure I did a great job of summarizing in the actual comment, but that was sort of the feeling I got out of the thread. And
Yeah, I think it captures the sort of fundamental, people think that the turbofish is carrying its weight, and we should not allow ankle brackets in this position like this, because they're concerned about grammatical complexity, essentially.
And its implications for various things.
Well, I would say some people think that. There are a lot of other people.
Obvious. I mean, I think that is the
Yes,
argument against doing it that is appearing
Yes.
on.
Is there another? So
I don't think there's any other concern that is.
I mean, there was this sort of concern about. I don't want to attribute too much seriousness to this concern, but there was sort of a thread on what previous promises has the Lang team made that they're now broken, and does this open the door to the Lang team making, taking the language in an unwanted direction kind of stuff, right?
Right. So there
previously there was a bullet on the website or whatever about we have a
Honestly, I think that concern should be taken with approximately the level of seriousness that it was, posted with, which is to say very little.
So
I don't mean to be flip. I'm just saying I think that's one step short of a troll, and we should treat it accordingly.
We are autocrats. Do what we want.
Feel that way.
So I think the concern to uncertain for its value is like a collection of different concerns
Absolutely.
gathered into one. I think there is a question of limits, which Graydon was a proponent of. I think there's a question of like how does this interact with Vim and like editors who can't do proper semantic analysis, like regular expressions and stuff. I think there is a concern about like some people think it's easier to mentally parse Turbofish for humans. Maybe there's something I missed.
I think that pretty much captures it. Like,
there was a negative space thing in there of if this is not legal, then diagnostics can detect things better.
So what? Maybe we should look at what we. I agree. We should do something on this thread, right? And there are basically a few options. We can close it. What seems bad is to just open it.
Yeah.
We can close it. We can sort of move to do something. We could close it and reopen. I don't know. What are the space of things we think we should consider, and who has energy to push any of them through?
So a question to Scott: would you be interested in having a discussion about like these concerns and working through them?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, I feel like this is another one of those hard things where both sides have logical arguments for what they're saying, and it will be extremely difficult to come to consensus on this. And we have a couple of these things that we're having trouble with.
Yeah. If I might make a suggestion, I think it's safe to say none of us have especially the appetite to try to sort it out with each other while having the discussion in public on GitHub with GitHub's abysmal mechanisms for doing so and while getting sniped at. So yeah. I think if we're prepared to have the discussion and come to a consensus, then we should come to that consensus and then reopen the thread and say, okay, we're at a consensus, we've lifted our concerns, here's where we're at. If we're not prepared to do that, then I think we should close it.
Hey, Scott.
Yeah, I think.
Yes, Central? Sorry, Taylor?
Oh, I was going to ask, would you mind, I don't know how much we want to go into this now versus having a dedicated meeting on it, but I was a little bit confused. There are a couple of bullets here about interaction with Vim and other editors, easier for humans to parse simpler grammatical complexity and limiting language, grammar allows for better diagnostics, performance of backtracking. Those all seem like theoretical concerns with a more complex like linguistic grammar. Are they also concerns that you share specifically tailored to this change? Because I agree that those are all hypothetical concerns with a more complex grammar, but I didn't get the impression that this particular change was actually something that was causing performance problems or causing diagnostics problems. Or
I think these are things that people have mentioned, not necessarily that they are all true. For example,
right. I guess I'm just trying to clarify if anybody is mentioning them in the context of this specific change makes the language harder for people to parse, like, or this specific change is causing diagnostic problems, or if it's all in the realm of, the class of grammars that are not LLK or tend to be and have the ability to be more complex and harder to understand than LLK grammars.
So a couple of things that I think are worth mentioning. I think it is, there is consensus on the thread that this change does make the grammar semantically more complicated, not in a substantial way, but more it does cross a point where it goes to a different class of grammar. That said, there's the class of concerns that are, so will we do 20 more things like this? And I think those, we could come to a consensus in this room of, yes, but we won't do 20 more things like this. And we can generally agree that we would have to very carefully think before doing another. Then is this specific thing causing these problems? And for that, there was actually at least one comment buried in the thread somewhere, or one of the mini threads somewhere, where somebody said Vim won't have any problem with this and they can already make it parse that. Because Vim doesn't actually use a full grammar to parse anyway.
Right. The Vim one is an especially funny example because it uses regular expressions which already can't parse Rust, right?
Exactly, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think overall the issue with this issue is that I don't think there's any good sense of what the real consequences of removing Turbofish would be.
In a technical sense or in a social
technically,
sense?
Technically, I mean, that's the problem, is that this anguish over it has drowned out there's no real analysis of what the material impact will be on tooling, on diagnostics. It's just abstractly it could make that worse, and it's talked about in a way that makes it possible for us to get an actual equivalent of
Yes.
a run,
Yes.
Isn't this the kind of thing that is best answered by unstably supporting it and extending tooling and saying the specific concerns about VI and other tooling seem like it's exactly what Nightly is for.
So
That's
yes.
actually fair.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to make a comment. This is something where I would actually be enthusiastic about a proposal that said, let's merge this, let's do the obvious implementation on Nightly, let's plan on not stabilizing this for a year, and if in a year tooling does not have any problem with it, then I don't have it. I'd rather it take a year to stabilize it than that we never touch it again because we're afraid of what might happen. So that's one possibility.
So one thing that does make me a little worried there is we have some other RFCs that we merged on we're going to put it there, and then that sort of just punted the same conversation problem to the tracking issue.
I also don't think
we talked about some of those as let's not do that again.
No, I completely agree. To be clear, I'm proposing if we were to do that, and I'm not saying that's the path forward, but if we were to do that, it would be with a very specific statement of the long stabilization period is to evaluate the impact on tooling and ecosystem, and that and nothing else is the criteria we're using for, do we decide to reject this rather than stabilizing this?
Right. I think that there are some of these concerns, like the ones around.
You're missing the queue.
We have a speaker queue now.
Oh, I didn't even see. Sorry.
No worries. Go, Taylor.
I was just gonna say, so I'm all for experimenting. I'm all for getting this on Nightly and trying it out. I don't think that the concerns that have been raised in the thread and the people who are concerned about them will be satisfied by any results that we show on Nightly, because I don't think that the concerns here are strictly technical. I don't know what we want to do about that. I think that there's a real conversation we need to have around the sort of social interaction we're comfortable with here, and how much we're comfortable just sort of cutting people off and saying no we're going to do this because we think it's good. But I don't know. I have a really hard time following technical arguments for the technical arguments against this, but I have an easy time seeing them as sort of social. There are social costs to pushing forward.
So I do think that if we do this on Nightly, some people will still have their concerns will not go away if we show that this is not a problem for tooling, but some people might be persuaded given enough time. And another point is that I remember we actually tried this with Sin to do the parsing, and it wasn't a problem. Though in fairness, Sin uses recursive descent, I think, so it can do semantic parsing.
I just, do you have a procedural thing, Nico?
Yeah, procedural thing. Josh, was that a response to what Central said directly? If so, feel free to give a short question.
Something that Book said earlier.
Okay, then never mind. Scott.
I just wanted to say that with the actual concern that I have on there, I think compiler is absolutely free to go switch to a fancy new GLL parser, absolutely free to have this behind a feature flag, all that sort of thing. I have no complaints with whatever technical choices that they want to end up making there in a way that makes this better, allows better diagnostics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all good things if they work out. And that's how the Rusty authors wish to have that work. I don't think anything I'm going to say here should impact those sorts of choices. Go ahead, Boats.
Yeah, I think and I think this is in large kind of like on the same theme as what Taylor said, that there's some of these issues with changing the grammar. Putting it on nightly will help us determine if they're a real problem. Like the technical stuff around how other tools handle Rust code, the diagnostics issues, but the issues around people who think, both like Graydon's point about limits and people who say that TurboFish just makes their experience better, those opinions will not be impacted by that. And so I think we have to decide we are overruling them now if we're going to put it on nightly. We have to decide that those, we're not, those concerns don't block this feature, right? So and that feels like I kind of, fundamentally, I am not convinced by those concerns, but I don't really want to be engaged in a thread that is telling people that we have decided to overrule those concerns.
Okay. I think most of what I wanted to say has been said, except that contra votes maybe, I don't mind being engaged in it. I don't want to be engaged in it, but I feel like we can't not make decisions because we're not going to reach consensus with the whole internet. We know that.
Yeah.
And we can't not make concessions you can't let that be a thing that's going to block us from going forward. Which is not to say we should lightly disregard what people have to say. I feel pretty okay if we feel like we can get, and I think we have it, a pretty exhaustive list of if we have a list of the things people are talking about, and we kind of either say, well, we're going to resolve that specifically by testing it on nightly, and I think as is written here, to make that effective and to avoid the repeat of this thread, we would make specific conditions. And the other things we'll say, yes, we agree that we just don't think that's a problem. We have weighed these two things and we feel that overall the benefits of this outweigh the danger of that. But I'm willing to do that thread if we can come to an internal consensus, I guess. And I think it's important that we are not afraid to do that. All of that said, if we decided this is more trouble than it's worth right now, I could live with that too. But.
Josh?
So the short question was, I just wanted to take the temperature of the call again and ask, it sounds like we don't specifically have substantial concerns about the known unknowns. It sounds like the concern, Boats, that you expressed earlier was more, we don't know what we don't know and we don't fully know whether we will break something horribly if we do this. Would that be an accurate assessment, and what's the general consensus on that?
I mean, that's my impression, is that people talk about tools being broken and we have no idea, there's no concrete information about.
I think the limits conversation and the how does this end up is the thing that is concerning to me. I have every confidence that we can write a backtracking parser that will handle this just fine.
Okay.
In the vast majority of cases that anyone cares about. But
I just want to second that to say, I mean, I'm feeling pretty good about this, but I do have I would definitely feel better if it had been on nightly and we had a lot of tools doing it. those technical concerns are the ones that are most, they're also the easiest to test, but they're most concerned.
So that was what the reason I asked that question was that I feel the same way. I do completely agree that this is more a concern of what don't we know rather than what do we know. And that includes the various concerns registered on the thread. In that regard, I feel like in reopening this, the biggest thing we need to do collectively as the language team is to demonstrate to the thread that we actually do understand what we're getting into, that we understand what lines are present, and that we are crossing one with deliberation and not using that as an excuse to say it doesn't exist anymore. This is slightly related to my registered concern on the thread of this doesn't set a precedent, but I think it's also a little bit of trolling here and there aside. I think that there was a bit of a point in the thread about lines and the language team in that we should recognize the concept of a focal point, or I've heard people call it a showing point, where there is an obvious point of consensus around here's where the grammar is, here's how strong the grammar needs to be. If we cross that a little bit, then the obvious next focal point is, well, I guess we just have a full GLO grammar, and we don't actually want that. So if we want to reopen this and say, here's how we're moving forward, I think it would be valuable if we said, here is the exact scope of our decision. We are not deciding that Rust is now a GLL language with usage of arbitrary GLL features. We are deciding that this one feature is worth a special case in the grammar because it trips people up, because this, because that. We are not using that as a precedent for future GLL. We will put the same amount of deliberation into any future grammatical change that's not confined to the previous grammatical subset. That kind of statement needs to happen if we're going to reopen this, so that people don't have room to say, hey, the Lang team doesn't know what they're doing, which I think that there is at least a legitimate fear that is motivating people to say things like that. Not that we don't actually know what we're doing, but more people have fear of unknown unknowns, and they want to know, hey, have we at least thought about the unknown unknown?
All right, we got 2 minutes left. We got Central and ecstatic Morse, and I have some thoughts, but let's do Central.
I'm gonna kick out in 2 minutes.
So first, I have a brief question to Scott. Would you find, like, if we do the nightly experimentation and stuff, and it turns out that it's not a problem, would you find that to be like a convincing argument to eventually stabilize? Then I have some other points. Maybe you can answer that first.
So I put the thing up in a little bit above about this is sort of any sort of backtracking thing that we're dependent on for parsing opens that door of one of those things that I liked when I found Rust in the first place is it didn't have the like Scott Meyer's most vexing parse thing because you don't have to do this. So I think personally I've never found the turbofish nearly as much as a problem as a lot of people do. I think we also have this, like, right now it's really easy to support this because we only have like 10 examples of it. Maybe that I would get less worried about that sort of a thing if we actually saw people pick this up in nightly greatly. But the other thing that slightly does worry me about nightly experimentation on this is we keep seeing more and more that as we've made things work on stable, that people don't go to nightly just for avoiding 2 colons sometimes. So I'm slightly skeptical that we can get a huge enough volume of stuff on nightly here that would have this turned on that would actually notice anything going weird, because most crates aren't going to bother. I don't know if that answered your question, sorry.
Yeah, I think so. I think my other points are not as important, so I'll skip them for now.
So, all right. First of all, Stagmore says a pretty good point that we want to be careful by how much we say we won't go forward without X, Y, and Z, is that puts potentially gives people power to block in bad faith, though I'm not sure if that would be a real problem. But I think a careful phrasing of our choices there can help. But the other thing I would just say is that I think we haven't, it seems like we have a lot of interest in reopening this, but it seems like the immediate step is to resolve, like what Scott just said, for example, and to talk more deeply amongst ourselves before we do anything. So maybe that's the outcome, is that we'll try to, if we're going to try to do that, I guess someone has to volunteer to do it. I have to go right now, and I think it's Halloween. Yay. Gotta go get costumes. But maybe we should talk about that over email or offline or something to try to figure out who and what, who's really going to do this and when.
Yeah. I would like to not really be involved. So
yeah. All right. Thank you all for a really cool meeting. That was good.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.